So what happened is I was a hobby quilter and I didn't even know that there were patterns that you follow. So when I got on YouTube, I was researching construction of a quilt. So it was like, the top, the batting, the backing. And I thought you just kind of cut squares and sewed them together. Like I didn't realize there were patterns for quite a while. And then once I did, I was following the patterns, but there were times I'd be like, I think I want to change this.
Welcome to Quilting on the Side, the podcast where we uncover the secrets to turning your passion for quilting into a profitable side hustle.
I'm Tori from the Quilt Patch by Tori.
And I'm Andi from True Blue Quilts. And together we're your co-hosts on this exciting journey of creativity, entrepreneurship, and all things quilting.
We're here to help you navigate the world of quilt pattern design, course creation, digital marketing, and running an online quilt business. We've been through the ups and downs ourselves, so we know what it takes to make money from your favorite hobby.
We are delighted to welcome Belle from Seems So Me to this episode of Quilting on the Side. And I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Belle, if you tell us a little bit about where you are currently and how you got started quilting and developed this into a business. We're so excited to chat with you tonight.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. Well, physically, I'm in my sewing space right now full of boxes. So I am in the middle of moving a week from today. So it's a little bit of a disaster behind me, but I'm just going to own it. I'm Belle from Seems So Me, and I'm a quilt pattern designer. I'm also a quilt guild consultant. And then I also do teaching at guilds as well as national shows for some techniques, particularly cathedral windows. That's kind of the thing I've kind of been known for lately because they're my favorite block. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I've only been doing this for 3 years.
That's amazing. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on our show, is because I'm so inspired by that fast trajectory. And I know a lot of times building a business can be more of a marathon than a sprint, but it always helps to get that great information from people who have managed to be on the fast track. So people, I'm sure, are noticing a little bit of an accent. You are from the South.
I am. So I am from Arkansas, and that's actually where I'm relocating to. So I left Arkansas 30 years ago this month when I graduated high school, went off to college, and I've lived, I say a little bit of a gypsy. I've kind of lived all over. So I went to school in Conway, Arkansas, but then from there I moved to Washington State and lived in Puget Sound area. So in the Bay, kind of across from Seattle on an island called Whidbey Island. Lived there for a while, and then I lived in Colorado in the Denver area for a bit. From there, I moved to Arkansas again for about 12 years, then to Alabama, then to Missouri, which is where I'm at, Southern Missouri, which is where my husband is from. So I've been here for the last about 7 years, and getting ready to relocate back to the town. I say the town I grew up in. It's in the Washita National Forest, about 10 miles from my father.
Very nice. Yeah, I've been following you on social media and the pictures of your new home and the area. And I know you're doing a B&B with your father.
Yes, it's been a 3-year project. So I kind of, I grew up on 45 acres, and it's in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. It's in a beautiful national forest on a river, and there's a lot of land there. And so we kind of talked about it and decided to build an Airbnb/small quilting retreat. It's actually going to serve several purposes. I can host retreats there because from the outside of the building, it looks like a garage, but it's actually this huge multi-purpose room that will have space for the sewing and all of the pressing stations and all of that. And then connected to it is the lodging part of the house. But we'll also use it to host wedding receptions. So there's these bluffs where there can be small intimate weddings, and they can have their reception there and stay the night there. So it's going to kind of serve several purposes, but it is open. We've had 3 guests this month already. But the actual multi-purpose sewing space is not quite ready. And the reason why is because I thought we could manage it from Missouri. We just can't. Dad's on a lot of acreage. He's going to need some help as he gets older, and to really run it properly, we needed to move. So we kind of had to stop that part and do some remodeling of the home we're moving into. It's kind of a mid-century modern inspired partial underground home. So it's a lot smaller, and it didn't have enough space for my husband and my offices, but there were 2 workshops on the property. And so my father has converted both of those so that we each have an office. Mine is an office/studio. So we kind of had to slow down a little bit, but it looks like springtime for sure. I'll host my first retreat.
The pictures are gorgeous. Your home looks amazing. And I wish you all the best. I can't wait to make that a destination retreat space.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm excited. I've never done it before, so I definitely have been getting feedback from people that have. And I'm going to do a little pilot retreat to bring some of my closest friends, quilty friends that all get along, so there's no drama. And, that can give me feedback before it's really, really open to just anybody for it.
Belle, you mentioned that you had been quilting for 3 years, so that coincides with the pandemic. Am I remembering that right? Tell us how
Yes.
you started quilting.
Yeah, I am a beginner pandemic quilter. So what happened at the time is my other business. So my other work I do, I'm a trainer and consultant and facilitator, and I've done that for years in the nonprofit sector. And at the time I worked for a company, and everything shut down. And so I was on Zoom 8 hours a day, about ready to lose my mind. And I was like, I need a hobby. And I have, I'm in remission now, but I have an autoimmune disease. And so I had to be really, really careful. And so, there just wasn't getting out much. And so I just thought, what can I do? And I had an old vintage sewing machine here that we had bought my little bonus daughter to use, but she wasn't quite ready to learn to use it properly. So it just sat in here, and I got to looking at it. I thought, I need to learn to make something. My mom sewed garments, but she never taught me how. But my grandmother was a quilter. She never taught me how. So I just got on YouTube and learned from YouTube. And so I really never took a class until I went to QuiltCon last February. Not this past February, but February before was the first time I ever got to be with people and take a class.
That's great that you just dove in, and it's wonderful that we have all those resources to let people learn it on their own from home. But it does make a difference when you're in a class with other quilters.
Well, and I think, Andi, that's where we met. It was that get together after QuiltCon that Carolina Moore put on. We sat next to each other. That's, I think, how we met, right?
Yeah, that was a great conversation. So the Quilting Pattern Designer group on Facebook is a wonderful community that brings us all together. So what pattern did you start with in this grand adventure of?
So what happened is I was a hobby quilter, and I didn't even know that there were patterns that you follow. So when I got on YouTube, I was researching construction of a quilt. So it was like, the top, the batting, the backing. And I thought you just kind of cut squares and sew them together. Like, I didn't realize there were patterns for quite a while. And then once I did, I was following the patterns, but there were times I'd be like, I think I want to change this. And the more I did it, the more I thought, I wonder what's involved with writing a pattern. So I bought EQ8 thinking it spits out the directions, the graphics, everything. And I would just have this beautiful pattern. So I spent the money for it, designed my first pattern in there, and it didn't do that. And I was heartbroken.
Yeah, it gives you the pretty pictures, but some of the step-by-step you have to come up with on your own.
Yeah, so I was like, well, this is for the birds. And I happened to be on Facebook. My husband and I were This was during the pandemic, and we borrowed a friend's cabin for our anniversary because we wanted to get away, but we didn't want to be around people. And when I was there on Facebook, an ad popped up for a quilt pattern designer course. And I was like, okay, that's what I maybe need to do. And what I had done prior to that is I had bought some templates, like some Canva templates on doing it myself. And it was just too much. Like I needed to know about marketing, distributors. There was so much more I needed to know. So I ended up taking the pattern writing course. It was 2 years ago, actually, this coming month. So it's been 2 years where I learned the business side of things, as well as actually how to write a pattern, fabric requirements, all of that. So I started with my first real pattern was a small make. It was a quilt journal cover pattern that I had for free as an opt-in to my website. And then from there, my first quilt pattern is called Dueling Diamonds, and it's still my most popular one so far. They're all with distributors now. My patterns, there's 4 distributors that carry them plus the Fat Quarter shop. So I've just been so grateful because apparently it's not maybe as normal for things to happen this quickly. And I mean, I don't have a frame of reference, so I had no idea until I've kind of learned along the way. So I have a very grateful heart for how things have worked out for me.
That's wonderful. Yeah, a lot of people just kind of do their own website with patterns and local shops for a long time before they get in with distributors. And were those was that aspect of the business covered in detail in the course you took? Is that kind of how you?
Well, a lot, I shouldn't say all of it was. Some of it was enough for me to kind of understand their process, but there was still, a lot more involved with who do you contact. I had to figure out and find out who to contact, who to email, what it meant to send in samples. So I thought it meant you send in samples of the quilt. No, it means the front and back cover for the reps to take to the fabric shop. So there were some funny questions that I asked, and they were so gracious with me, as several of them started to pick up my patterns.
Yeah, congratulations on all that. That's wonderful.
I think hearing that'll give newer pattern designers some courage to reach out to those distributors. How did you start that? How did you start that with distributors?
Yeah, so the first one, it came about because I had applied to be a Maywood studio maker. So you know how the fabric companies will have, processes to be an influencer or a maker. And so I applied and I was chosen. I was shocked, And so I built a relationship with them, which they're a division of E.E. Shink. And so when I published my first pattern, I just approached them first because that's who I knew. And so they chose to carry that, my first pattern. And then from there, as I built friendships with other quilt pattern designers in the industry that have been doing it for a long time, I have several, I would say 3 really good mentors that, you can just call up and speak privately and confidentially to. Then they kind of helped me be like, okay, here's some other ones, to go to. And some of them shared, who I needed to contact with, which I'm grateful for because apparently not everyone, shares that information. So I had some good friends that were really helpful.
Yeah, I would agree that building those relationships is really important. And just for other introverts and people that feel a little bit awkward having to get in the door and that whole kind of thing, is that you're going to find both sides. Some people are going to be very open and willing to have those conversations, and other people, as you said, they may hold that information a little bit closer. And I figure you just can't take that personally because everybody has to run their business the way they're comfortable with. And unfortunately, or, it just depends. Some people are more open about the behind the scenes conversations. So we're hoping to be here on the Quilting on the Side podcast, a resource for some of those behind the scenes discussions, but we do respect everybody's level of comfort with sharing what some people may consider trade secrets, and you have to be in the business for a while before you've reached that level of confidence. But
well, and it's interesting. I get teased a little bit. I have extroverted preferences, and apparently that's not as common in the quilting world, which I didn't know, but people tease me. There's only about 5 of you in the whole world that, are extroverted. So I love people. I'm a trainer and facilitator by nature, so I'm used to being in front of people. So it's not really scary. And it's like the worst thing that can happen is someone says no. Right. And that's okay. It's not earth shattering. It's just sometimes it's not now. The answer is just not now.
Well, I would attribute it to your Southern charm, Belle. So
well, I don't know if that's it or not, but I do love people and enjoy being with other quilters, whether it's remotely or in person. And I don't know. I try not to be overly sensitive and just kind of go with the flow. But I will say what was helpful was, as a maker with Maywood Studio, that really helped launch my business quite a bit with marketing, and I'll forever be grateful to them for that. Approving me to be part of that program, and letting me be part of some things that really helped market my business. And within that, we had some education. So the editor of Quilting Daily, so Tracy Mooney, came and explained the whole process with how you submit a pattern to be in a magazine. Like, I had no idea how all that worked. So we had that. We had a fabric designer come on and kind of explain how that works with designing fabric and that process. So there was a lot of behind the scenes that they really educated us on with makers, as makers, to just learn some of those things that you just don't know how they work.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'm hearing that you think that those ambassador, brand influencer type positions can be very beneficial. We've heard some negative press recently about some of the programs and the fact that they don't pay a flat rate to their designers. A lot of time you're doing it for the quote exposure that doesn't pay the bills, but there are definitely intangible benefits to those type of programs.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen on social media, you can see all of the both sides of the fence of how people feel about it. And I'll tell you my personal opinion. I think everyone has free will and they get to choose if they want to apply or not. If it's not for them, then don't apply, right? If it is, then apply. I can say for me personally, I learned so much as a brand new designer. And they were such a wonderful company. They're a small company, but the hands-on and the camaraderie they created, and just the learning behind the scenes and helping promote me. I can't say what would have happened had I not done that. It may have been a much slower process. And I consider them close colleagues because of that. So, I think do what works for you, take what works and leave the rest, but no one's holding, a gun to your head to say you have to apply, even if you don't agree with it. Just don't apply if it's not for you. That's my personal opinion on that.
I'm just curious how much you made from your patterns being distributed.
Do you follow a formula for your pricing structure?
It is standard pretty much actually for all of them. And so it's 35% of wholesale.
Okay.
So basically it's 65% of ultimately retail, is how that works for most all of them. And then they pay, well, you can negotiate. They pay shipping in the sense that you use their, UPS or FedEx code and print out the label and they cover that. But they kind of calculate that into what, you're paid. Or you can pay shipping and then you get a little bit of a higher margin. So it all comes out in the wash, but that is actually pretty standard across the board for all of them. They all order from me pretty much monthly. There's a couple that order, they're larger companies, so they order more than others. But I do also work with Fat Quarter Shop. Now they do digital and paper. And I was comfortable enough with their system to trust how that works, to make sure that the report I get every month, can trust their process for that, and made sure that, the process was vetted before I agreed to do the PDF downloads for that. But they've all been wonderful to work with. I haven't had any complaints at all with any of the distributors that I've worked with. It's been a lovely process.
How many do they order a month, roughly? I know you had some larger, some smaller.
Yeah, so it depends on the pattern. Some are more popular than others. So on average, sometimes an average order will be anywhere from maybe 24 to 36 of, each of the patterns, and some will order twice a month. Some order once a month, some twice a month. It just depends on, like, if the fabric shops are selling a lot of a certain one, they'll order, more one month than they do others. But I do get orders from all of them every month.
So one last question about distributors. I was curious if you have them printed and you just send them to the
I
distributors,
do.
or okay, that's how that works.
Yeah, so I have them printed and pay for all that up front. And then my garage has been my warehouse for all of those. And I also sell other things online. So I have an online store, and I sell notions and things as well. And so I'm getting ready to move where I'll have a 700 square foot studio that I'll now have a lot more space for my merchandise and patterns. But I have them printed. You also you put the patterns in a little plastic sleeve with a little hole that they'll hang, from the pegboards at the shop. So I buy those, and that is part of when you send that in to them. That comes with them.
Thank you for that detail. I
Sure.
appreciate it. I know our listeners will too.
So you mentioned you also have another job, another business, doing consulting work. How are you balancing those two businesses, those two jobs? Is it kind of you work on both things throughout the week, or are there dedicated times of the month that are specific to one or the other?
That's a great question. It depends on the day. So I don't have a schedule because, to be quite honest, it's difficult to make a living just doing quilt pattern designing and selling patterns. Maybe if you've got a lot of notions and you've been doing it for 10 years and you're traveling all over and teaching, and maybe have a partner, which I do, but I couldn't just contribute with just that business. My other business, I travel throughout the country, and I also train virtually. So my expertise is in working with nonprofits. So I do strategic planning, board of director roles and responsibilities training. I do a lot of leadership training, as well as team training that has to do with thriving as teams. And I do conflict management. And I've done that for years. In a particular industry, a lot of my contracts that I work with have to do with frontline responders and child abuse organizations. Once I started my own business, I also work with various nonprofits and then just for-profit businesses too. And what happened was I ended up seeing this commonality between both. So as I started my Seam Sew Me business, I kept hearing these disturbing stories about people's experiences at quilt guilds. It broke my heart. I did a national survey at one point just to get anonymous feedback about how people experienced those things. And not, of course, all guilds had these, but a lot of guilds had one or several of these challenges. And so since I do that work in other nonprofit, I was like, you know what, this is needed in the quilty world. You've got volunteer boards of directors that are also members. So there's a conflict sometimes of interest, and balancing being a member and a board member can be challenging, but also how people are treated, the financial piece of it, the fiduciary responsibility a board has to the community and to their members. So I have another part of my Seam Sew Me business that is strictly training and consulting, where I work one-on-one with quilt guilds. Go in and we do a deep dive on creating something called psychological safety, where it is safe to be included, to learn, to contribute, and to challenge the status quo for innovation and growth.
Definitely needed in the quilt world. I've served on several boards, both for other volunteer work and in the quilt world, and it just volunteer organizations in general don't have enough of that type of training. So
yeah, I looked and there was just nothing. There were no services really for them at all. Now I have to charge substantially less than I do in my other business just because most of them can't afford that. And so I'm slowly writing a guidebook that can be purchased.
mm-hmm.
And then within the next year, I'll have some online modules, one that is board roles and responsibilities for guilds that they can take virtually. That's a cheaper option for them. And then if they need me to come in and we really talk through some hard things and they need someone there to work through their strategic plan or conflict, then I can come in and do that in person or virtually. And then the other piece to that is I had to postpone it, but I am going to be launching a podcast for quilt guilds. I've already got the domain name and some people lined up to be interviewed, but this move happened. So I've had to punt it towards the end of the year, but I realized there's not a podcast specifically about guilds for guilds. So the great things that they're doing in the community and how they're helping, as well as some of the challenges that they're having. And then I'll talk about some resources and solutions for them too.
As hard as it was going through the pandemic, we really have seen a lot of interest in online education and doing things differently moving forward. So that is the silver lining, I suppose.
It is. There were good things that came out of the pandemic. Quilting did for me. My only regret is I didn't learn. I'm 48, so I started when I was 45. My only regret is I didn't learn earlier in life. I've got all this time. I could have been quilting.
We still have decades, as I was telling my daughter, she wanted me to throw out some of my smaller scraps. And I said, I'm one of the younger quilters. I am not getting rid of scraps at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's just like, I want to keep my eyesight, watch what I eat and exercise so I have mobility to be able to do this well into my 90s.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for sharing about your guild resources. Hopefully people will take advantage and get that good education piece so that we do have strong support for our hobbies.
So I lectured, the 1 hour lecture at larger quilt conferences is called Building Healthy Quilt Guild. So it's an overview of changing the culture of a guild. So I did that for AQS Week, American Quilter Society Quilt Week, and I'll also be giving that lecture in Nashville, right outside of Nashville, for the Original Sewing and Quilting Expo.
I think that's going to be powerful, bringing more people into the quilting community.
Well, here's
and not
the
only
deal.
helping the guilds.
What I have noticed and what came back from that national survey is guilds are having trouble, or they're not thinking about recruitment of younger ones. There's some guilds that feel very strongly about not including younger children, for they're, thinking they're too much trouble. And there's, supervision and liability and things that can be worked around. But for growth, you have to look at younger ones, because many guilds have mentioned our members are passing away and we're not growing. And it's such a beautiful hobby and craft. I can't imagine not having a place for my stepdaughter to go to to be able to learn. I've taught her here at home. But if children are not given that opportunity, or even those in their 20s or 30s, how are you going to know if you like it? Because they don't teach it in home ec anymore.
Yeah. I'm going to say that's been a big barrier for me and being involved in any local guild that I've been near, as I'm a military spouse, so I've moved a lot. And I haven't been able to be involved in a guild because I do have young children, and their meetings are in the middle of the day, or their events are in the middle of the day. And as a stay-at-home mom, as I was in when we were in Arizona, I wasn't able to go because I had to watch my children. And then at night, the guild meets during dinner, and it's not a good time for me to go to then either. So I'm hoping there's some kind of middle ground that can be reached where we can be involved at least sometimes and really get younger generation in the door, because I was really excited to be a part of my local guild, and I think they have a few events coming because they don't meet during the summer. So I'm going to go jump on their website here soon and see what they're doing, and I'm hoping to be more involved in this local one.
I hope you'll get to as well. One of the suggestions I usually give, and this is what our guild does, is we have our monthly membership meeting has 2 time slots. So they do the same thing, the same membership meeting twice. One's at 10 in the morning and one's at 6 at night. So that, when one spouse gets home from work, the other can leave to go to the meeting, to be able to do that. Or while the kids are at school, if it's during a school year, you can go, but you're at home in the evening. So having those 2 slots are definitely important, as well as when the classes are taught. If guilds teach classes, to really look at that flexibility.
And do you wonder that might change the culture of quilt shops?
You mean as far as staying open later?
Yeah, having more flexible hours. My current quilt shops that are local to me are open from 10 to 3.
Yeah, that's really hard. And I have a little bit different perspective because my mom owned a quilt shop. And so I saw the behind the scenes there, and she had one evening that she was open late, and she was one of the few in the Phoenix area at the time that had extended hours. And I still, because I'm working still myself, I teach on the weekends, and there are always people that are so grateful to have a class on the weekend, because like you said, a lot of shops are Monday through Friday, 10 to 5, and that cuts out the working population. So
it does. And one of the things that I talk about when I do my lecture on healthy quilt guilds is we talk about inclusion. There's a reason there's so many diversity and inclusion trainings in any business throughout the country. And so you have to look at, shops and guilds have to look at, how can we create schedules and flexibility that include people of, different ages, different cultures, backgrounds, genders, all of that. There takes a lot of thought with strategic planning to really overturn maybe deeply entrenched things and afraid of change. There's nothing bad that can come out of trying something new. If it doesn't work, just pivot, and readjust. So, when I went to a trade show this summer, H&H Americas in Chicago, and they gave kind of a state of the industry address. And one of the things that came out of one of their big surveys was definitely reaching, shops trying to reach more of the younger ones. So I think we're going to see that change more as time goes on. And we have so many that learned during the pandemic. I mean, that increased in itself, younger ones coming in. So I'm hopeful. I'm definitely hopeful.
yeah, that's great.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I'm all about, unless you're a person that's coming to something to cause harm or you're not human, everyone should be included. I don't care what color your skin is, your religion, your political position. This is quilting, right? Like, this is for everyone that wants to learn. And we don't need to waste our energy on drama and keeping people out, but really the world is a tough place right now in general, and so I'm a firm believer in, how can we find joy in working together rather than cliques and, personality conflicts and things like that. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Pivoting back to some of your patterns and things, and you said you've had the Healthy Guild lecture offered at AQS, but you've also taught your own pattern. Is that correct? How did that process get going? Because that, again, when I talk about your kind of rocket ship to success, I was very amazed after hearing that you had only been in the business for such a short time, that you were already on this kind of national teaching circuit.
again, they put out the application, these large shows to apply. And I was like, well, what do I have to lose? I had taught a couple of classes at my local guild. And, by nature, as I mentioned, training and facilitation is something that I do quite a bit of. There was still a learning curve with pacing it and giving it the right amount of time that's needed for different people with different paces of how they sew. But I just applied. So AQS was the first one that I applied for on the national circuit. And they picked my cathedral window class. And I, again, will be grateful for them, because once they did, then when I applied to other national shows, like I'll be teaching at Quilt Festival this year, it kind of vets you. If you train at one and teach at one, then, it helps with future ones. But I just took a chance and sent in my proposal and my photos. And with the cathedral window, I had not noticed anybody teaching how to make that in a modern method that is not the old traditional, cumbersome, not fun method, in my opinion. So it's my favorite block. So it's what I teach the most.
Yeah, you've had some gorgeous samples that I've seen pictures of. So that definitely looks like a
thank you.
Fun
I'm
pattern.
still learning. There's something I learn, I think, every week.
So if you could offer just a couple tips with that application process, because I'm getting encouragement that anyone can fill out the application. So just go for it. Don't let that be your stumbling block. But it sounds like you focused on something that was unique enough to catch somebody's attention.
Yeah, I think that was a huge part of it. Plus, they ask if you'd had any teaching experience. So for those that are new, start with your guild, local guild, your guild, other local guilds, just to get the practice on, how to keep the pace in the room, the different personalities that you're going to work with, the goofy IT things that can come up. Just start locally, even if you do it for free, to get some practice. Because that is one of the things they look for, is that this is not your first time to show up at a national show and you've never taught before, which makes sense. You don't want participants to be disappointed if you don't know how to handle those kind of situations. So I would encourage those to start at their local guild and surrounding guilds, and good photos, a good catchy write-up, on what they'll learn, and maybe something that you don't see a lot of, something unique that people might want to learn, I think would be really good.
What is your plan / strategy for launching new patterns? Because as a quilt designer over the years, I have found it hard sometimes to balance promoting what I've already done versus working on the next new thing. So can you speak to that at all?
Sure. Well, lots of times when people make a quilt from my pattern on social media, they'll tag me in it, or some people will email me photos. And so what I'll do is, when that happens, I will push that out with a link to where people can buy the pattern. So I constantly just kind of push it whenever my followers or customers share with me, and they're so excited that they've made it, and it helps them feel good about themselves. So I share that way. And lots of times in newsletters, I'll just kind of reshare, some patterns to remind people, or new subscribers that have never seen it before. I'll do it that way. For me, as far as patterns, with my business plan, is really not to release more than 3 a year. With me running my other business and training with guilds and teaching, I've had to learn to have a good pace. And I have a little bit of dyslexia. And so writing patterns takes me 2 to 3 times longer than those that don't. I reverse numbers, I reverse letters. And I don't love the actual writing out of the pattern. It's part of what you have to do. But I tend to go for quality over quantity, because I always include a video with my patterns. I'm a visual learner. So one of the unique things about my patterns is, and they're a couple dollars more for this reason, I take the time to record how to make the block or blocks and all the tips. So there's a private link in each of the patterns. So it's hidden from the regular public on YouTube. But when you buy my pattern, you can scan the QR code, use the link, and that way you've got it written and in video. And so that takes longer to do that and record that. And I focus on the confident beginner as well, which I still consider myself a confident beginner. So it just makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, those are great tips. Definitely important to maintain that sustainable pace. Set yourself up for success.
I love including the hidden video. That is a great idea.
Well, the way it came about is it's like if I make this public, you could make this quilt if you kind of guesstimated, right? So, I don't want people to be making the patterns and not buying it per se, right? But I wanted to add value to the pattern. And I get a lot of feedback from people. Thank you for the YouTube video and all of that. I mean, I learn best that way. And it seems like my followers and customers do too. So I do that as well.
I mean, that's the eternal debate in the pattern writing world is, yes, experienced quilters could probably figure out almost any quilt without the written pattern. So we're not necessarily trying to sell our patterns to those people. We want to reach the people that need a little more instruction or just don't want to mess with all the math. So
right, yeah, because that's math was my worst subject in school. I have a tech editor, so she checks everything, and then I have testers. So I always have at least 10 to 12 testers, so that I don't have mistakes in the pattern. I just, that's like my worst fear is for someone to waste fabric because I didn't get it right. So I pay a tech editor even before I send it to my testers so that they're not wasting fabric. And then any feedback or slight tweaks or suggestions on the wording they may have, if I change anything, I have my tech editor do one last look through of that so that before it goes to print, I'm not having to worry about any big mistake. And I do free tutorials as well for simple things that aren't my patterns. So I have things on my YouTube channel like needlebook patterns and how to make pin cushions and things like that. So I try to balance some free things with things that you'd have to make money to feed yourself. So
exactly, this is a quilt business, not a quilt charity. So
that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of which, do you ever see yourself being able to do this full time, or is it something you want to stay as a side business or keep as a side business?
I would love to be able to do it full time, and hopefully eventually I can. But for now, I just need, I need both. I need to be able to do both. I mean, my heart is always helping with nonprofits because nonprofits help the community, right? And stronger nonprofits contribute to stronger communities, in my opinion. So I'll probably always dabble a little bit in that and, it just be contracts that I really, really want to take on. But, I'll have days where I'm training 4 hours in the afternoon with that business. And then, I may do a little bit of admin work or email in the morning with Seam Sew Me. So each day looks different. I have ADHD, so I jump around from thing to thing. And, it keeps me, I guess, from getting bored. It's some days it's like I get 20 hours of work done in 8 hours. And then there's some days I don't get anything done. It just depends.
Sounds like pretty normal life.
Well, I use a planner. This is the Maker's Yearbook. I keep it here on my desk. So I have tasks and plans, but sometimes I have to punt it. I have to pivot, on what I do. If I'm not in a flow state for creating, I just change it and switch it around, do it on a different day.
I love how forgiving you are of yourself. Like, I hope that our listeners hear that and take that for themselves. Like how forgiving you are about punting it. I love that term you keep using is punting it. And I like it.
Well, I can't take credit for that naturally. I have been through a number of years of professional and personal development myself. I mean, I had a business coach and a life coach. And so I've gone through a lot of leadership, professional leadership training, self-awareness training myself. I mean, I teach a lot of that. So it's like I have to apply it to self. So I've had a lot of years of, really trying to be gracious. I say I'm a recovering perfectionist. I used to be a perfectionist early on in my 20s. So I don't know, life's just too short. You have to find a good balance with it. So I try to model that behavior for others.
All right,
Oh
rapid fire
boy.
question. All right, so first question is, what is your favorite color?
Ooh, it depends. So if it's a quilt, that's one color. If it's clothes, it's another.
So share both.
Okay. So if it's in the quilty world, it's usually in kind of the rust orange coral family. I like kind of the earthy orange coral, kind of colors. And if it's with clothing, I usually like blue or green. I have red hair, so you can't, there's some colors you just can't wear.
Would you prefer to purchase and sew with pre-cuts or yardage?
Yardage.
That has been our number one answer.
There's more flexibility. There's more flexibility with yardage.
Yeah, that's true.
Although a lot of my patterns, I do try to make pre-cut friendly because we end up in stores, we buy them, and then we're stuck with them because we don't know what to use them for. So I really do try to make some of my patterns pre-cut friendly.
Yeah.
Is your cathedral windows pre-cut friendly?
Yeah, my last one, Winsome Windows is.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay.
Nice.
What is your favorite notion?
Oh, that has to be my Seam Sew Me jumbo alphabet clips and number clips. So I design these notions and I sell them. It came about because I was sick of using Post-it notes and pins, and I would poke myself, they would fall on the floor. And so I started kind of experimenting. And so I design and make Seam Sew Me. They're made out of antique brass and die cut wood, and they hold large stacks of fabric. And it's the alphabet and the numbers. I'm getting ready to have them manufactured because I don't have time to make them as much as I used to. So that's my favorite notion.
Well, I have to run out and get those because I love Elizabeth Hartman patterns, and she does all the animals, and they have, small eyes and intricate stripes and shading and things, and you end up from letter A to double Z almost.
So many people have emailed me about that. That's why they like them, because I can do half the alphabet or the full alphabet. But
2 more questions. Do you have hobbies other than quilting?
I do. My favorite hobby is I love going to thrift stores and flea markets and yard sales. I love to collect vintage things. I love old things. I'm a bit of a sentimental person. I grew up going to yard sales and thrift stores and stuff. My dad was a very resourceful person, so I was taught that it was a good thing to do. So I look for vintage orphan blocks that have been hand stitched and or hand quilted quilts. So not machine. Mm-hmm. And then I make totes and things like that out of them. So I'm always looking for vintage quilty things. So that's my other hobby, is thrifting.
The last question is, who is inspiring you right now?
So I tell you, someone that continually inspires me is Brene Brown. So she does a lot. I'm trained in what's called Dare to Lead, and her research on vulnerability and courage, it always strikes a chord with me. She always really inspires me to really try to be transparent and vulnerable. And, like you said, kind of gracious with yourself. So I listen to her podcast, I read her book. So I would say Brene Brown. She has a new one called Atlas of the Heart that was released a couple of years ago. If you want to do some self-analysis and soul-searching, she's definitely inspiring.
I've read a few of her books. Good choice
there. And thank you for being so vulnerable and open with us today.
But I'm so grateful that you asked me to be here as part of your new podcast and kind of tell my story. I'm always grateful because that just kind of helps get the word out a little bit about some of the things I'm trying to make a difference in the quilty world. And, everybody's great. Everybody's got a story. And I'm a firm believer in a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I have found that the quilty community is very giving and for the most part very open, which is quite different than corporate America. So I'm just grateful for you all asking me to be here and to get to know you all better.
Yeah, before we go, tell everybody where we can find you.
Sure. You can find me on two places. My website is www.seamsewme.com. Now that's a play on words. It's Seams, Seams, Sewme. I'm really active a lot on Instagram. And so that is at seams_sew_me. Also YouTube. So that's Belle at seamsewme.com. You can find me there as well. And then I'm on Facebook some, but those are the main places you can get a hold of me. And if you got questions, feel free to reach out. And I do try to get back to people. Now, I warn you, because I'm extroverted, I do usually send sometimes voice DMs back to people. And it's really funny because they'll be like, oh my gosh, thank you for, like, I got to hear your voice. Like, it's so funny, but it's quicker, than typing out kind of a long thing. And I don't know, it's just a little more personal. So if anybody listening messages me, don't be alarmed if I send you a voice DM to answer your questions.
That sounds like a fun way to definitely save some time and not have to deal with autocorrect that always wants to take sew and make it see. I am not seeing all these things. I am sewing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A few things that are coming up for me is the beginning of October, I have manufactured and designed an AccuQuilt die. So the other part of me loves English paper piecing. And there was a shape that they didn't have a die for. So I had it manufactured and then pitched it to them, and they're going to actually launch it. So that launches October 3rd. It's a new shape. I can't tell you what it is yet.
I know.
So that'll be out with a free video pattern to go along with that die. And then also I have a new thread line, a curated thread line coming out with Wonderfeel that will be out. There's two. One will be out later in September. The other one will be out in October with that die as well. And then I mentioned the podcast. So it's called the Quilt Guild Podcast. So if anybody's interested in being on that, you've got some guild stories you want to share, feel free to reach out. I'd love to interview either the two of you or any of your listeners.
Sure.
Yeah. And then I'll be at Quilt Festival teaching Cathedral Window class and then a little bit of EPP.
Awesome. That just
Well, you are rocking it.
I'm just doing what I love. And then in the spring, you'll see on my website the ability to be able to book retreats at the Airbnb. So be looking forward to that as well.
That all sounds wonderful. So good luck with your move, and we wish you all the best, and we'll see you at one of these fabulous quilt events soon.
Oh, I look forward to meeting you both too. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Andi.
What a fabulous episode with Belle. She shared so many great things, and her journey is just amazing. So, Tori, what is your biggest takeaway from that conversation?
So for Belle, gosh, she has so many good things. So probably my number one was how she took her experience outside the quilting industry and brought it in to help fill a need. I thought that was really creative of her, being able to take her experience and apply it to her favorite. Well, at the moment, it seems like the quilt industry would be her favorite industry.
Yeah, definitely important to continue building on your strengths and your experiences, because there is a lot of carryover, and definitely identifying that need in quilt guilds for her expertise. I was impressed by Belle's courage to just jump in, and maybe it's the newcomer blissfully unaware of the obstacles, and just, you don't know that it's not a thing to apply to be a national teacher right away in your quilting career. But again, the answer will always be no if you don't even ask the question. So you have nothing to lose by reaching out and trying those new things. So that was very encouraging to just go for it.
I think there's a lot of courage in being the new person. And like you said, just jumping in and trying it. Like she said too, the worst that they could say is no.
Yeah. And you still get the enjoyment of quilting, no matter if you're doing it by yourself or teaching others. So definitely encourage the other members of our audience who may be ready for that step to definitely take the leap, and we'll be here to cheer you on. And if you enjoyed this episode of Quilting on the Side, please leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And hit the subscribe button so you don't miss our next chat. Until then, remember to have fun in your business and do a little quilting on the side.